Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Cimmerian September. This is a BookTube event that was created for this year by Michael K. Vaughan, where we're reading Conan all throughout the month of September. The canonical Conan stories as Robert E. Howard left them. The stories, the one thing that approaches a novel in length, the fragments. Because if you dedicate the month to doing that, you can read all of it. All of the Conan stuff that Robert E. Howard wrote. You can do that in 1 month. I've read those things so many times, in so many different moods, in so many different seasons and places and temperatures, that right from the beginning when I heard this suggested, I thought I might strike a different path and do the Savage Sword of September, do my own version of Cimmerian September, where I will certainly be rereading Conan stories. That goes without saying. But I'll also be reading the original run of Marvel Comics' black and white magazine, The Savage Sword of Conan. I made a start last month. I've been reading steadily in The Savage Sword of Conan. Almost all of these issues were written by Roy Thomas. A great number of them were drawn by John Buscema, with a varying roster of inkers. And I thought I would report on a few of those issues that if I thought they were interesting or maybe especially deplorable, I thought I would report on them throughout the month. So I'm going to report on one today. This is Savage Sword of Conan number 12. With a Boris Vallejo cover that it's wonderful, as Boris Vallejo covers always are, but it's a bit of a missed opportunity here. It's once you've read the issue, it's a strange choice of cover, and this is called The Haunters of Castle Crimson. The artwork is by John Buscema. Here he's inked by Alfredo Alcala, and it's absolutely gorgeous. The combination of the two is absolutely gorgeous. Those tiny little fletches on the ground that not only simulate the texture of the ground, but also very subtly give shadow and motion lines. Buscema didn't do any of that. The precise wood grain of the broken gate. Buscema didn't do any of that. Alfredo Alcala adds all of that. Look at the detail here. This fallen man. That is just incredible. The use of shadow and cross-hatching there. And Buscema didn't do any of that. Alfredo Alcala did all of that. I think that for Conan, he's Buscema's best inker. Oddly enough, ironically, Buscema didn't like his work. He hated even to look at the finished pages if this inker was doing him. I'm glad that he didn't throw his weight around, because I'm very happy that Alfredo Alcala inks a lot of these issues, especially the early issues. I'm not always so happy when he does his own artwork, but as an inker for Buscema, it's incredible. And this is the opening tableau. This is the city of Kizalabezen. And the narration, this is written by Roy Thomas. He tells us that there used to be a desert band of marauders called the Zouargirs, and the Zouargirs were led by their gigantic, charismatic, legendary chieftain, Conan. But they were scattered. In an earlier Robert E. Howard story, they are scattered. And most people think that Conan is dead. Certainly his Zouargirs are scattered to the winds. And Thomas tells us that some cities heard that and grew a little lax in their defenses against other marauding bands, and Kizalabezen is one of those cities, and now they're paying the price because a band of marauders has entered the city. And we see them doing their marauding. We get a little bit of Conan. No one's paying attention to him. They're too busy fighting and looting. This guy, for instance, kills an old merchant and is greedily thumbing the jewels that the merchant had behind him. Conan's just riding up behind him, and you might think Conan would draw his sword and kill the man, not only out of a sense of comics code morality for killing a helpless merchant, but also to take the jewels himself. But Conan doesn't even bother drawing his sword. Look at this sequence. He kicks the man's head against the stone so hard that it pulps his head and he just slides down along the wall. That is incredible. In another part of the city, we see another fat merchant who is telling his slave girl Zelika that she must guard the door while he makes a getaway. He doesn't care about her, but it doesn't matter. It's too late. A marauder enters the room and kills him, and covets the girl in a very brutal way. The marauder says that Our chieftain says he wants loot this time, not slave wenches. I'll spare you a few moments of my precious time, but then I'll have to gut you. And we know what he's going to do in those few moments. That's the sort of thing, those are the sort of implications that you can do in Savage Sword that you could never do in the color comic. And he's threatening her with, with the point of his spear, when he hears a voice saying, "Why don't you try sticking it down your own throat, dog, or anywhere else it might fit?" And he turns and says, "Who?" And look at this panel. Look at the panel that our artists give us. My name is Conan, which in this case, as in almost all cases, is synonymous with you should say your prayers, because you're not going to last long. Look at this picture. Just amazing. Just incredible. It's such a wonderful full panel shot of our hero. The guy lunges at Conan, and once again, Conan does not deign to draw his sword. He doesn't need to. He easily blocks the spear thrust and crushes the man's head. And Zulika, the slave girl, thinks, well, I was going to die at his hands, now I'm going to die at your hands. But Conan is staring at her. Why is he staring at her? He doesn't do anything, he just grabs her and takes off. And they make it out of the city with comparatively little trouble. And Conan takes her to a nearby castle. There's always a castle nearby in a Robert E. Howard story. Castle Crimson. Look at that artwork. Just look at how beautiful that is. He takes her there because he knows the person who's in charge of Castle Crimson, believe it or not, a man named Maltham of Nemedia, who was a friend of his, and they shared an adventure together earlier on in Savage Tales, in Savage Sword of Conan. The guards at the gate challenge him, but he says, just go to your master and tell him that Conan the Throat Slitter is here. Maltham recognizes the name right away. He didn't believe the rumors that Conan died with the rest of the Zwargir. He welcomes him in. They chat like old friends. Look at how beautiful this is. I'm sorry to go on and on like that, but this is just incredibly lovely. And Maltham tells Conan the story of Castle Crimson and how it got its name. It didn't have a name for a long time. It was built as a fastness. It was ruled by powerful, arrogant people who garrisoned and princed it and whatnot. And the last of those was a guy named Roderick. That's him up on the parapet there, who thought that he was all secure, but he had a traitor in his midst, a traitor named Mordek, who leads a group of men. You can see he's leading a group of men through a subterranean passage. They surprise the guard and gain control of the whole castle. And he can't leave Roderick alive. Originally, Roderick parleys with these besiegers to let him and his 100 men go, but Mordek can't leave him alive. And Roderick knows this. He lives just long enough to know that this evil guy is going to kill him, and curses him. Says that if you do this, me and my men will take our revenge someday. But it doesn't matter. They all die. And eventually, the Mordek's people have to give up the castle anyway. It's too much of an overhead. So they eventually give it up. And the people, the paymasters of Maltham, let him rule it in their stead as a sort of an outlying garrison against their enemies. Maltham looks all around. He's heard rumors that there is a treasury that has not been found in this castle that might make him a rich man. So he looks all around. He doesn't ever find a treasury, but look at this panel. When he's down in those catacombs, he could swear sometimes that he hears voices saying, "We will rise again." But nothing comes of it at all. And he's just talking with Conan. He's having a fine time of it. He's okay in this castle. When Conan draws his attention to the slave girl Zulika, who he has brought with him, and says, I'm wondering, do you know, I'm telling you, I want to know what you think of Princess Korma, a figure named Princess Korma. And Maltham tells Conan what everybody knows in the neighborhood, in the surrounding kingdoms, which is that she was the daughter of Abala bin Kor. And she was lovely, and she was promised in marriage to a powerful chieftain named Kelru Shan. But everyone knows she died. And so the marriage never came off, nothing came of it. And Conan says, well, once upon a time, I was in her city and saw her. There he is, actually sitting on a wall, watching her go by. I was in her city once and saw her, and Zulika looks exactly like her. And Maltham is astonished. What? They look exactly the same. If I were to go as an emissary to Kel-Rushan and tell him that his intended bride is still alive, and how much will he pay to get her back, we could both be very wealthy men. He'll pay any price to get her back, if he's sure. I'll bring an emissary back here to the castle so that he can identify her himself. Maltham agrees, and Conan tells him, while I'm gone, while I'm on this embassy to Kel-Rushan, dress her up, clean her up, make her look less like a slave girl and more like a princess. And then he rides off. And he says to her, you were not born a slave, were you? And she says, what does it matter, my lord? Enough that I am a slave now. Better to be born to whips and chains than broken to them. Once I was free, now I am not. That is all. And he says, a slave? Strange, it never occurred to me to wonder what passes through the mind of a slave, or for that matter, a beast of burden. And she says, better a man's steed, master, than a man's slave. And he says, yes, there is nobility in a good horse. And he just stalks off. But look at the glance over his shoulder. A lot is being told here in visuals. Conan goes to Kel-Rushan's city, demands to see him, tells him it's a matter of utmost importance. And when Kel-Rushan makes an appearance, we learn something about him. When you see him in this issue, if you ever find a copy of Savage Sword of Conan number 12, you're going to blurt out a name, but it's not going to be Kel-Rushan. It's going to be Jafar. He looks exactly like Jafar. And he seems like a fairly decent guy. When Roy Thomas is populating his Conan stories with all sorts of secondary characters, you always have to estimate which of them are thoroughly evil and which of them are at least fairly decent. Maltham of Numidia, for instance, is a perfectly decent guy. Kel-Rushan wants this marriage to go off, but how can he trust Conan? You expect me to walk into a trap? Conan tells him, no, you can take a bunch of men with you. And they go to the city. Now, they are spied upon. Look at this artwork. Good Lord. Their spy shimmies down the wall of the city. He creeps to a thicket where there's a camel waiting. Look at that. How gorgeous. And sure enough, Conan is leading Kel-Rushan back to the Castle Crimson. But in the meantime, Maltham has started to like Zuleika, which you would be able to tell from Buscema's visuals, even if you weren't getting the wording. He's beginning to like her against his best wishes, as she tells him a bit of her story. But they get interrupted because Kel-Rushan and Conan are now, there's a trumpet blaring, they are now at the walls of the castle. And Conan wants Maltham of Numidia to bring her forth up on the parapet so that Kel-Rushan can see her, and he is astonished. He starts to notice, even from a distance, little details. She does not carry her chin as she did the only time I saw her, and yet, by the gods, it must be. Her bearing is less haughty than I recall, but still. And she doesn't speak in the same tone. The voice is soft and musical like Cormor's, but the tone is different. The princess was used to command, and her tone was imperious. Conan has to tell him that 3 years of captivity, the story that he's pushing forward here is that she hasn't been dead for 3 years, she's been a slave for 3 years, that would work a change. And Kel-Rushan says, true, I will ride to yonder spring and camp there for the night. Tomorrow I will give my answer on the matter. He needs to think about it. He might need to do something else as well. There might be treachery involved in what he's thinking. But in the meantime, Conan and Maltham are talking about their plan. Another fantastic visual. Look at how beautiful that is. Even down to the goblet. The details of the goblet, just amazingly beautiful. In a way that I can tell you, I hope you never experienced it on your own, does not hold true for the rest of Savage Sword of Conan. And while they're talking, Maltham simply tells Conan, I can't do it. I love her. I can't give her over to that man. Conan spits out the chicken that he was eating. He spits it out. You can't believe it. And they fight. And it's a fight that you, as a fan of this story, do not want to see. These are both good men, and they're friends. We don't want to see them fighting, but their fighting, fortunately, is interrupted because a shadowy figure has kidnapped Zuleika and wished her out of the city and left the gate open. So they are interrupted in their fighting because the forces of Kel-Rushan are attacking the city. Look at that. Look at those visuals. And they need to mount a defense. They can figure out what to do about Zulika later. They need to figure out what they're going to do about this invasion, or they're all going to die. But in the course of the invasion, Conan sees that cloaked figure carrying the princess down a mysterious corridor. And he follows. And he gets to a catacomb under the city where are the skeletons, the moldering skeletons of Roderick and his men are down in that cellar. Conan does not have his sword. He broke it to force the gate open to this passageway. So Kel-Rushan, or this Mordek, who is this traitor, the shadowy figure is Mordek all these years later. He figures he can kill Conan. And almost comes close. He knocks Conan over the ledge onto the skeletons, where Conan finds a sword. And he immediately draws blood. And that's a bad thing to do in this chamber, because the blood drops on one of the skeletons and they start to come alive. They grab Mordek, the traitor. Is it actually Roderick's skeleton that's grabbing him? Grabs him and, again, the black and white comics can get away with stuff, rip his head off, while Conan and Zulika watch. And they think all the other skeletons start to come alive. They're all drenched in blood now. And Conan thinks they're going to have to die here, but the skeletons start wandering right past him. Their business is with all the forces attacking Castle Crimson. They're not interested in killing him. In fact, one of them stops, comes back, and asks for his sword. Conan just hands over the sword to him. And they start fighting. They start fighting these men. So all of a sudden, the attackers of this city are fighting living skeletons that cannot be hurt. And in the midst of this fighting is Kel-Rushan, who's fighting this skeleton. He's hacking away at the bones of its skull, but it's not doing any good. Eventually, it just kills him. And Conan says, well, at all events, our quarrel has ended because Kel-Rushan can hardly ransom her now, so she's all yours. And just as they're thinking that, the guards at the top of the hill, at the top of the tower, say that another army is approaching the city. And who do you think that is? Huh? It's Abala bin Kor. It's the girl's father. It's the father of Princess Korma, who has heard a rumor that she is in this city. His spy, the spy that we saw leaving the castle, has told him that his daughter is alive and well and in the city to advance it back. The gates are open. Half the defenders of the city of Castle Crimson are already dead. The skeletons want no more to do with anybody. So our defenders, Maltham and Conan, are screwed if this guy decides to attack. But before they can do anything about it, she walks out of the still open gates to see her, and they embrace. Now, does that mean that she's his daughter? Does it? Does it mean that she was the Princess Korma all along? We get a little Roy Thomas's great narration here. Struck speechless, Conan wonders, can it be that he rescued the true Princess Korma and never knew it? Maltham ponders, was the story she told me all lies? Then, even as both suddenly recall the details of the princess's disappearance has been an oft-told tale in the desert, accessible even to a slave girl, the girl turns her head, and one eye closes just for a moment. It is then that Conan realizes that a princess would have been raised largely by the palace women and seldom seen by her busy father. And that, besides, people mostly believe what they want to believe. She's winking at him. Over her father's shoulder. She's winking at him. And the prince, Abala bin Kor, is perfectly happy to affiance her to Maltham. She loves him. He loves her. It'll give him a good, strong place in his rear. The castle will be very welcome to him. All's well that ends well. It's a happy ending. Maltham asks Conan, what of you, friend Conan? I'll make you the first among my captains. That and more, if you'll remain at Castle Crimson. And Conan says, no, Maltham, I'll stay for the wedding if it's not overlong in coming. But like Abala bin Kor, I smell days of peace wafting over the horizon. And you know that's not a scent much to my liking. So I'll be off for Zambula, queen city of the desert, where the gold coins flow like sand, and there's a beautiful, full-bodied woman for every camel that lumbers out of the east. Now that's the life fit for a barbarian. Aye, it surely is. And that's how we end the story. With Conan just saying, now I don't want anything. I don't want the settled, peaceful life. And they're all happy with it. That's how the story ends. A rare Conan the Barbarian story that is a completely happy ending. Everybody gets what they want. All the bad guys are dead, and all in the way that they should die. And Conan is free to go about his way, being Conan, just continuing to be Conan. There's even a little bit of a mystery. There's a little bit of the supernatural, those skeletons coming to life, and there's a little bit of a mystery. We will never actually know if this is Princess Korma. We'll never have a definitive answer to that. As you can see what I mean by the cover. This figure, this mysterious cloaked figure with blood dripping from its fingers, never happens in the story. The revenant corpses do happen in the story. And if Boris Vallejo had reworked this a bit, that could have been far more prominent on the cover. It's a little bit of a switcheroo there. It's not the same story as is telegraphed on the cover. Not that that's a major sin. And that is Conan number 12, which, when you sit back and think about it, is going to strike you as a little odd. It's a grand story. It's beautiful artwork. I think it's a wonderful story. It's got just the right balance of action and sorcery. It's got Conan coming face to face with sorcery, which is great. That's always the magic moment of any Conan story, I think. But when you step back, it doesn't feel quite right, does it? That Conan would concoct an elaborate scheme to bilk a chieftain out of 10,000 gold pieces on a ruse? A clever, imaginative ruse? We're going to pass off this pretty slave girl as a pretty princess? It doesn't feel like Conan. He never does this sort of thing. It's not totally wrong. I mean, it's possible that you could think of him doing it, but it doesn't feel as straightforward as Conan usually is. And there's a good reason for that, because this didn't start out life as a Conan story. This didn't start out life as a finished story at all. Robert E. Howard wrote a story called The Slave Princess, but it was set during the Crusades, the Third Crusade, and it starred one of his more forgettable characters, Cormac Fitzgeoffrey. And we don't ever get the conclusion. The happy ending was probably entirely Roy Thomas's invention. We just get a fragment. That fragment was fleshed out by somebody else, and I think you can find it in one of those Del Rey Robert E. Howard volumes. But it was never finished by Robert E. Howard. And once Roy Thomas realized that he had a going concern on his hands with Savage Sword of Conan, that the sales numbers were such that this really needed to keep going, that's more difficult than you would think, to keep coming up with Conan stories. Roy Thomas was a big Robert E. Howard fan, so he went liberally ransacking through Conan, Robert E. Howard fragments, through stories that were published about other characters. This was set. The fragment of this that we have was set during the Third Crusade, not in the Hyborian Age. Roy Thomas just changes it all, I think, very effectively, but you can't get rid of the DNA of the thing. The DNA of the thing, I think, betrays that it was not originated as a Conan story. Because the whole scheme is not something Conan would do. It's more likely something Conan would foil than something that he would do. Again, the characterization is so good in the course of the story that I didn't mind. But if you read this issue, if you find it, God knows where you will find this issue, in some yard sale somewhere, but if you read this issue and that grates against you, that's the reason why. In the opening credits, we're told that Roy Thomas adapts this from a story called The Slave Princess, but we're not told that it wasn't originally a Conan story. You have to figure that out on your own. I don't think you'll have a hard time doing that. But anyway, that is my foray today for Cimmerian September. One random issue of Savage Sword of Conan. I will do this throughout the month. I will check in on all different periods and experiences of reading Savage Sword of Conan, because that's the way I'm going to be doing Cimmerian September. Although I'll probably check in with stories as well. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, and I will see you next time. Thank you, BookTube.